Sister Jose Habde is a Native American medicine woman, and I think she's Franciscan nun. And she went to see His Holiness the Dalai Lama once. And one of the things you do when you meet the Dalai Lama is they give you a white scarf, and then you hand it to him, and he blesses it, and he hands it back to you. And she was told, do not touch His Holiness. Don't make physical contact with him. So she gets in line, and now she's right in front of the Dalai Lama. Dalai Lama is very tall. She is quite small. And she hands him the white scarf. And then she grabs his cheeks with her hands. And I mean, they're both elderly people, but she's even more elderly, Sister Jose Habde. She grabs his cheeks, she shakes his face, and she says to him, I can do this to you. You're my baby brother. And he just starts to laugh. The lamas, the monks, they're like horrified. But she's laughing, he is laughing. They didn't know each other, but there was a friendship between them that was just spontaneous because neither one of them was bound by the rules of their traditions. It was just love that was their law.
Welcome to Ceci, the podcast where you see what others see.
Hi there. Good morning. So today, what are we talking about? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Ceci here. Is anyone there? Hi, my name is Ceci. I'm based in Berlin, and I want to welcome you to Ceci, the podcast where you see what others see. In this season, we're talking about movement. And today we'll talk about tradition, religion, mystics, and awakening into aliveness.
Our guest today is Rabbi Rami Shapiro. Widely recognized as one of the most creative figures in contemporary American Judaism, he received rabbinical ordination from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion and holds a PhD in religious studies from Union Graduate School. He was the founding rabbi of Temple Beth Or in Miami, Florida, and senior rabbi of Metivta, a center for contemplative Judaism in Los Angeles, California. Rabbi Rami is an award-winning poet, liturgist and essayist, whose prayers are included in worship services across the denominational spectrum of American congregations. He is author of more than 36 books on religion and spirituality, such as the celebrated Judaism Without Tribalism and Perennial Wisdom. He also taught over a decade at Middle Tennessee State University as adjunct professor of religious studies and currently co-directs the One River Foundation. He is also a contributing editor at Spirituality and Health magazine, known for his column Roadside Assistance for Your Spiritual Journey, and hosts the magazine's bi-weekly podcast, Spirituality and Health with Rabbi Rami. Among many recognitions, Rabbi Rami has received the Huston Smith Award for Interfaith Education and Service from the Board of Directors of the Order of Universal Interfaith and is a member of the Theosophical Society.
Good morning, Rabbi Rami. Thank you so much for being today with us.
It is my pleasure, Ceci. Thank you for inviting me.
So let's get started. I was reflecting the other day that two great things about childhood are certainly playfulness and curiosity. I remember once my little brother being around 6 years old, and at the time being very enthusiastic about Greek mythology due to a kid's book collection that my mom was reading with him during bedtime. So we're flying somewhere in vacation, And my brother turns to my mom and asks her, "Mom, is it God who invented us, or was it us humans who invented God?" Years later, now myself being a mom, I was putting my older son to bed, who at the time was about 4.5 to 5 years old. And he asked me, "Mom, if there's only one God, why come we need so many religions?" So we can talk about this later, but now, Rabbi Rami, I will rather hear from you. My understanding is that you were born into an Orthodox Jewish family, and children, as we've heard, are constantly making questions, and some of them of great depth. Were you asking these kind of questions to your parents? And if yes, did they feel challenged at all?
Well, I love what your brother asked and what your son asked. But no, I wasn't asking those questions. It never occurred to me to ask those questions. I just followed the rules I was told to follow, and that was it. I discovered, and I'd like to go back to the kids' questions because those are the best questions. But for me personally, I just sort of outgrew the ideas of orthodoxy, that there was a God somewhere out in the universe, or outside the universe, really, who created the universe, who chose the Jewish people from among all the people of the earth and gave them the only revelation that God had, which was the Torah, and then gave us the deed to the Holy Land, and all the things that go into the heart of Jewish teaching. I just thought that was ultimately, it just occurred to me when I was a kid that it made no sense. And then in high school, I was introduced to Hinduism and Buddhism, and it's not that they made more sense, but it just seemed to me that there was so much more to human spiritual creativity than what my Orthodox Jewish upbringing allowed, that I outgrew it. It made no sense to me. But I wasn't asking questions. I was just following orders.
So it was this getting in contact with new religions that opened your eyes, in that sense that religions became such a passionate subject for you.
Yeah. And the difference was, when I was studying Hinduism and Buddhism, first just academically, but then in practice, meditating, chanting, and all of that, the difference is, when I was doing it in the context of the Judaism of my family, I was, again, just doing what Jews are supposed to do. God said, do X, and I was doing X. But in the Hindu or the Buddhist understanding, I was doing the meditation to achieve a different state of consciousness. Now, later on, when I studied Jewish mysticism, I realized that's what those practices were about in Judaism also. But my parents didn't know that, and our rabbi, whether he knew that or not, never spoke about that. But when I studied Hinduism and Buddhism, it's not hidden. It's right on the surface. You're trying to get enlightened. And in the Hindu languaging of the thing, you're trying to awaken to your own divinity, or awaken to the fact that everything is a manifesting of the divine, however named. And all mysticism says that. Jewish mysticism, Christian mysticism, Hinduism, Buddhism, they all tell you that in one language or another. So they're really not different at that deep mystical level. But I never heard anything like that. And that's what attracted me to these other religions, the chance to awaken to the divine, not to pray to God, but to realize that you are a part of God. That's what attracted me to these other traditions, and ultimately brought me back to Judaism at that deep mystical level.
So my next question is going to come perfectly for what you're talking about now. In order to give the audience some context, we will hear a resumed version of the story of Rabbi Isaac.
Isaac, son of Rabbi Yeckel in Krakow. After many years of great poverty, which had never shaken his faith in God, Rabbi Isaac dreamed someone bade him look for a treasure in Prague, under the bridge which leads to the king's palace. When the dream recurred a third time, he prepared for the journey and set out for Prague. But the bridge was guarded day and night, and he did not dare to start digging. Nevertheless, he went to the bridge every morning and kept walking around it until evening. Finally, the captain of the guards who had been watching him asked in a kindly way whether he was looking for something or waiting for somebody. Rabbi Isaac told him of the dream which had brought him here from a faraway country. The captain laughed. "Ha! And so to please the dream, you, poor fellow, wore out your shoes to come here. As for having faith in dreams, if I had had it, I should have had to get going when a dream once told me to go to Krakow and dig for treasure under the stove in the room of a Jew. Isaac, son of Yekel, that was the name. Isaac, son of Yekel. I can just imagine what it would be like. How I should have to try every house over there, where one half of the Jews are named Isaac, and the other half Yekel." And he laughed again. Rabbi Isaac bowed, travelled home, dug up the treasure from under the stove, and built the house of prayer, which is called Reb Isaac's Shul.
So I once interviewed very well-known German theologist, Professor Bruno Schlegelberger, whose work concentrates mainly in Latin American indigenous peoples, religions, and cultures. I asked him, what do we get from preserving an indigenous language, and what do we lose when one of these languages dies? And his answer was straightforward. Languages are witnesses of cultures. If they're lost, the worldview is lost. The models in how one is situated in the world are lost. Encounters with other cultures can help us understand ourselves. Then he cited the extraordinary story of Rabbi Isaac, which we just heard, and which, in his view, teaches us that paradoxically, it is usually a person from another culture, country, race, or religion, meaning the contact with, in quotes, the different, what helps us understand our own culture, and with it, the deepest meaning of our own existence. Rabbi Rami, you compare religions to languages, and among other things, you say that the more languages we speak, the more nuanced our understanding of life becomes. So based on this, what would you say is the main importance of both religion and religion diversity?
Wow, what a fabulous question. And the way you put it with the story is so rich. So there's so much you could say about that. So first of all, there's another element to that story that we should highlight. And that is that, the treasure that the rabbi had was under his own bed. He went searching for it elsewhere, but ultimately it's in his own home. There's a story from the Sufi tradition of Islam about the Sufi saint Nasruddin. And Nasruddin is this great mullah, this great saint. And there's a story about him when he lost the keys to his house, and he's outside looking under a lamppost, and he's digging in the ground, and people come by and they say, "Mullah Nasruddin, what are you doing?" And he says, "I lost the keys to my house." And they say, "Oh, let's help you find them." And they're getting on the ground, they're all digging under the lamppost, and people come by and they ask what they're doing, and they tell them, "We're looking for Nasruddin's keys." And it just gets to be more and more people, and they can't find them. And finally, someone says, "Well, where do you think you dropped them?" And he says, "Oh, I dropped them in my house." And they say, "Well, why are you out here under the lamppost?" And he says, "Well, the light is better out here," right? The keys, whether you call them salvation or enlightenment or wisdom or whatever it is, the keys are always in our house, but usually in the dark place of a dream, the dark place of our unconscious. But humans like to go to the light, right? Our religions are all about going to the light. But the light is not where the answer is. The answer is you go to the dark place, the shadow place, like Jung would say. And oftentimes you can't go there directly. You have to go out and see the other culture, the other language, the other spiritual tradition that helps you then return to your own house and see it in a new way. I think it's very important. I think it's very important to learn other languages, both actual languages and cultural languages. So, I've studied, for example, German. There are things you can say in German that you can't say in any other language just because You can build words in German in a way you can't do in English, for example. So you can create complex ideas in what turns out to be one word in German, but it's a compound word. You can build words that you can't do that in English. It just doesn't make sense. But the concept that you're building in German with that word is something that you can't grasp any other way. So to learn German or to learn Sanskrit or to learn Chinese and to look at things through the ideogram, I mean, all these ways of looking at the world through language are very important. And the same is true for looking at them through other traditions. The ultimate truth, however, is beyond language. Language, to use a Zen proverb, is like a finger pointing to the moon. And the moon is the truth, but the moon is silent. It's beyond words. It's beyond language. You can directly perceive the moon, but you can't perceive it through talk, through language. So the problem the mistake religions make is to make a fetish out of the language. And then you make an idol out of the language. You worship the language. You worship the concepts. And you forget that the concepts are pointing to something else. So you congregate under the lamppost and you look for the keys and you make a religion out of looking for the keys in the light, and you forget to go into the darkness of the house and seek the truth there. So it's very important to learn other languages, both actual languages and cultures, but it's most important, ultimately, to let them all drop away and engage or perceive or encounter reality directly beyond words and concepts and language.
So you're known for your extraordinary writing, Rabbi Rami, and also you're blessed with the gift of the gab, meaning you know which word to pick, talking about words, in order to communicate an idea. One of the many books you have written is titled Judaism Without Tribalism, a guide to being a blessing to all the people of the earth. Now, how I understand Judaism is in fact a tribal religion. So what do you mean when you say Judaism without tribalism?
I make a distinction between being a tribe and being tribalistic. So Jews are a tribe. Right? Just like any indigenous people can be a tribe. There's nothing wrong with being part of a tribe. There were Germanic tribes, there are Hebrew tribes, there's nothing wrong with that. When tribe goes wrong is when it becomes tribal, and it's my tribe and my tribe only matters, and it's my tribe against all the other tribes. That becomes problematic. And that's true not just in human tribes like the tribes of Native Americans or Jewish tribes or actual people, but the same thing happens in sports teams, where you can get so attached to a football team, and I'm thinking in European football, not American football, but European football, you can get so attached to a football team that you can riot when your team, loses against a rival tribe or rival team. That's tribalism. When religions fall to the sin of tribalism is when they see themselves as exclusively true and everyone else is false. And every religion has that, is in danger of doing that. When Jews say we're God's chosen, that's tribalism. When Christians say that only Christians are saved, that's tribalism. And then within Christianity, you have different tribes, different denominations, some of which say we're the only denomination that's saved. Everyone else is damned. That's tribalism. So I think you can rescue the religion from tribalism by recognizing that they are, like I said before, fingers pointing toward the moon, but not the moon itself. So the book, my book, Judaism Without Tribalism, revisits Jewish tradition, Jewish teaching from the point of view that this is a Jewish way of articulating a universal truth and not a truth that is
That's relativized.
exclusively Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
That was an experience I had in Israel when I was in Jerusalem, and we were visiting the thumb of Jesus, and I saw all different Christian divisions, and that came very obvious to me, what you just said. So on tribalism, which seems to be, as you just described it, a trademark of the three big religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, what part would need to leave back that is holding us back in order to open up and see ourselves as members of a universal family? What part of our traditions should be the ones that we should keep, and the part that would be holding us back to make this big step of this breakthrough?
Yeah, I don't think we should throw the tradition out. We have to understand it from a deeper perspective. So, for example, Jesus says in the Gospel of John, I'm going to get this wrong. I want to say it's chapter 14, verse 16, but I could be wrong. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and nobody comes to the Father except through me. And what most Christians understand when they read that is Jesus is speaking about himself, that I, Jesus, am the way, the truth, and the life, and nobody gets to God except by believing in me, by following me, except through me. That's tribalism. That means that if you're not a Christian, you can't get to God. And that's tribalism, pure and simple. I don't want to throw the gospel out. I want to look at Jesus' statement more deeply from the perspective of Christian mystics, from the perspective of mystics from all over the world, because they all have the same perspective, I think. So when Jesus uses the term I am, and I don't want to get too esoteric here, but when Jesus uses the term I am, and Jesus is a Jew, Jesus doesn't know the gospel because there is no gospel when he's alive. Jesus' only sacred text is the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, when God, and to me the Bible is a human document. It's written by people. But in the story of Moses meeting God at the burning bush, when Moses asks God, what's your name? God replies, I am. Now in the Hebrew, it's Ehyeh, and it's a little more dynamic than I am. It's more like eyeing, but it's the idea that God is because it's a verb, it's not a noun.
It's like an action.
Ehyeh it's an action. It's God is saying, this is awkward in English. It's clear in Hebrew, but in English it's awkward. God is saying, I am the subject that manifests all the objects of the universe. I am the I that happens as everything in the universe. And that's what's revealed to Moses. When Jesus says, I am, as a Jew, he's referencing Ehyeh from Exodus 3:14. So
to this action.
Yeah, so what he's saying is the I am, the happening, the Ehyeh, is the way, the truth, and the life. You can't get to God until you realize the happening, the Ehyeh, the I am. He's not talking about himself. He's talking about a dimension of consciousness that is Jesus and Ceci and Rami and everyone who's listening to this podcast. It's everything. The only way to realize the divine, the Father, however you want to name it, is by realizing your true nature, your true consciousness, the Ehyeh, the I am. That's how the statement should be read. There's nothing exclusive about that. It's the statement of a true mystic, which is what I believe Jesus was. So don't throw out the statement, but learn to hear it from the mystical perspective. And Christianity has a rich mystical tradition, which you rarely hear in the church, sadly.
We will now listen to a clip from a previous interview to former NASA astronaut Jose Hernandez, who is a perfect example of someone who embraced both of his Mexican and American identities brilliantly. Well, being in outer space during his free time, he was reflective and he looked out of the spaceship Discovery's windows and saw the Earth from above. And he described this moment like this.
And the hatch, there's a window where we're looking down on Earth. And we had just made one revolution when it was my turn to unbuckle. And I could see Canada, United States, and Mexico. And I'll tell you what struck me as beautiful was that I couldn't tell where one country ended and the other began. And I said, my gosh, I had to go out of this world to realize that down there we're just one. We're one race. We're the human race. It's a very humbling, it's a aha moment because you see it and you say, why is there so much conflict in the world? We're just one down there. We're one race. We're the human race. I mean, borders are human-made concepts designed to separate us, and how sad, because from my perspective, we're just one. And I've always said in my interviews, I said, I hope one day we get to the point that it becomes a prerequisite that every world leader that gets elected, comes to power, takes this journey into space so that they can see the great world of ours. And I'll guarantee you that there would be less conflict in this world of ours.
So while preparing my questions, I was thinking how ironically it is that we build up our identity with all of these constructs to later, if lucky enough, be able to question them. It is an act of almost disrobing oneself, to challenge oneself and to enter, as you were talking about, Rabbi Rami, another state of consciousness. To cross is not easy. Why breaking free or awakening into aliveness may be sometimes so terrifying?
Okay, this really gets to the heart of the matter. But before we go there, let's go back to your brother and back to your son.
Of course.
Because this is the same thing. Why do we have so many religions? We have so many religions and so many gods for the same reason we have so many countries. It's because if you got the right perspective, the perspective of an astronaut, the perspective of a little kid, who was really not indoctrinated yet to chop up the world into tribes, to chop up the world into countries, and doesn't have the borders yet because he hasn't, because he's your brother and your son, so I'm saying he, but, they, children, haven't been to school long enough where the map is drilled into their head so it's all divided. They don't see it. They don't get it. What's the difference between an American or a South American or a Canadian or a German or a French person it doesn't make any sense. So somebody forces the differences, right? And then makes them absolute. And when I say somebody, I mean really men, not mankind, which I don't like the word. I use humankind. I mean men, people with penises, men. And they divide everything up. They make up all the religions. They want to be in control. So if someone's got one god, they're going to make up another god, and they're going to pit them against each other, and they're going to divide the countries up. All these divisions are imaginary. They're all created in the minds of people to try to elevate one people above other people. It's madness. It's literally insane. And it is the cause of, I imagine, 99% of, if not 100%, of the problems humanity faces, both politically, but also environmentally, because the difference, there's really no disconnect between the individual human and the biosphere, right? If there were no trees or plants, you and I couldn't exist. I need oxygen to survive, but my body doesn't produce oxygen. Trees and green things produce oxygen. They are as essential to my existence as my heart, right? I need their the oxygen they produce. They need the gases that I exhale when I inhale their oxygen. It's completely symbiotic. And that unity, if we understood it, and I don't mean intellectually, but if we really understood it, if we really felt it, would make it impossible for us to destroy the planet. We would know that by burning down the Amazon rainforest, we are trying to asphyxiate ourselves. It's suicide. But because we convince ourselves that the rainforest is not me, that Brazil is way over there, it's got nothing to do with me over here, by convincing ourselves of this insanity, we can commit, mass suicide. So it's something wrong in the human brain that we do this. Einstein called it a delusion of consciousness. And the only solution is the mystic stripping away of the delusion to realize the true consciousness of the interconnectedness of everything, not just humans, but the entirety of the biosphere of the planet. I would like to see, and I'm going on a little long, I apologize, but I would like to see in every mosque and church and synagogue and temple and ashram and every cultural center and spiritual center on the planet, I would like to see a planetarium. That not only do you go into church, especially if you go into a cathedral, we've got this big dome, that dome should be a planetarium. So you could go in and sit in the pew and not only look at the cross. Okay, I'm not going to take the cross away or the crucifix, but you could also look up and see the universe and realize you're part of that.
Imagine how beautiful that would be. Awesome.
I think so.
Yeah,
that would be awesome.
Yeah. So keeping on with religion, apart from offering us this path to the divine when we do take out this exclusiveness of the gospel, as you said, and we take the core and the message of it and how it applies to our lives today, religion can also be and is often misused. And this might be because we're too scared of our mortality. We're stuck in a more superficial stage of evolution of religion. What would be the first step to avoid falling into these misuses of religion that is not just breaking with religion or tradition for good, as we said, to become spiritual, as so many people identify themselves nowadays very superficially, but further to gain real access to this path that you're talking about of awareness?
Yeah, I think what has to happen is a couple of things. First, we have to know that religion is a human invention. And so it's going to have positive and negative aspects to it. If you look at dress codes, there could be something positive about them. I'm not going to, I don't know what they might be one way or the other, but there could be, dressing modestly might be a good idea. Mostly the dress codes that I see are imposed on women, and they're usually created by men, and they're presented as a way of protecting women. But who are they protecting women from? The men who invented the dress code. I mean, what the men are saying is, we are so vile, we men, that if you don't cover yourselves from head to toe, we're going to attack you and rape you and kill you because we can't control ourselves. If we see the hair of a woman, and this is not just against Islam, this is not uniquely Muslim. If we see the hair of a woman, that's it. I can't control myself, and watch out. So you have to cover yourself, as opposed to maybe forcing men to wear blinders so men can't see anything. That might be a better approach. But since men made up the religion, they're not going to do that. So, my guess is, and you always have to ask, the question, who benefits from all these rules? And mostly it's men who benefit, and not all men, but men with power. So the first thing we have to do is recognize that religion is a human creation. It's created by people with power to maintain their power. And then we can go and say, well, can we make it more more egalitarian, more, can we make it in such a way that it works the positive, not so much the negative? But the bigger issue, I think, is to help people realize that the mystic side, which is that what's really called for is this change in consciousness. Because, as you said, Ceci, that maybe at the root of all of our attraction to religion is a fear of our own mortality. We don't want to die. And as long as we don't want to die, we're looking for an escape hatch. And religion provides you with an escape hatch. There's heaven, there's reincarnation, there's immortality. I think, among some religions, some people you just won't die. And I don't mean you go to heaven forever. I mean, you can live on earth forever. There's a chosen few who will live on earth in a paradise, and they'll live here forever. There's some religions that say you become a god and you'll have your own planet with your own spouse and you'll rule as gods on another world. It's all a way of escaping from your own mortality. The change in consciousness is a realization that you don't die because you are not who you think you are. If everything is God, which is what we were saying a little while ago, if everything is this I am that's happening as all reality, then Rami is a temporary manifestation of the I am, just the way a wave is a temporary manifestation of the ocean. The wave stops, it dies. Rami stops, and I will die. The shape, the form will die. But the ocean itself, the I-ing itself, was never born, and it never dies. To the extent that I identify as this, I'm screwed. It's going to die, and I don't like it, and I'm going to join some cult that will promise me, no, you'll never die. But this is a false identification. The extent I know who I really am, part of this infinite, endless, unborn, undying consciousness, then I don't worry about death in the same way. I don't need to escape because I'm part of this other I'm part of this other reality that doesn't die. Let me, if you bear with me just for a second, I'll give you an example of how I teach this to little kids. So a little older than your son, like 8, 9-year-olds. I give them a piece of rope, about, I don't know, what's that, a foot long piece of cotton rope. And I tell them to tie a knot in the rope. So the kids tie a knot in the rope. They each have their own piece of rope. They tie a knot in the rope. And I say, what's the relationship between the knot and the rope? And they all can see it. They say, well, the knot is the rope in a certain shape. I say, good. Now I say, tie another knot in the rope. So they go somewhere else on the rope and they tie another knot. And now they've got a piece of rope with 2 knots in it. Compare the 2 knots. So they're in different spots on the rope. One may be a little smaller, a little bigger, a little tighter, a little looser. But they're still both the same piece of rope. Then I say, okay, and I make it personal. I say, the first knot is my mom. The second knot is me. I'm just going to name them. Now, my mother died recently. So I said, okay, my mom's dead. So I'm going to untie my mom knot because she's not here anymore. So I undo it. Where did she go? Right? The knot is gone. But where did she go? Because she's the rope, and the rope is still there. And the kids get that. Well, she didn't go anywhere, but the shape is gone. And then we have a discussion around, I loved that knot. That was my mom. I liked the way it sounded, the way it smelled, the way I have memories about it, all those things. And because I loved it, I miss it and I grieve. But the rope that was that knot never disappears. And it's still me also. And when I die and you untie my knot, the rope is still there. So enjoy the knot, but identify with the rope. And then the fear of dying disappears. And the way religion can manipulate us because of that fear disappears.
Beautiful. Thank you. So let me recap. In terms of religion, awareness has, if I understood well, like different stages. Shall we call it like that? Like there's more an accessible stage or level, or how do you call it? And then I will say in this level you have different rules. The different rules you need to follow that are placed, like, I don't know, in each religion, like attend church on Sundays, or do Shabbat on Saturdays, do not eat pork, for Jews and Muslims. And then there's another greater scope where we start to relate the meaning of the parables or stories or the gospel that you were mentioning, of tradition and religion in our present life. For example, when it is understood that what a certain rule or passage in the scriptures wants to teach me about myself and my present life now. And then the final reach would be this personal relationship with God, with the divine force, or whatever you want to call it. And by the way, this was my answer to my son's question. Remember at the beginning we were talking about this question about the need of different religions. I told my son that religions are like the languages we speak, and that I could only teach him the one I know. But when he grew up, all the different things and languages he will learn and the things he will experience would give him the key to be able to speak his own language with him, meaning experiencing God personally. And he was pretty content with that. But my first question is, do you agree with this map of dimensions or scopes that I mentioned, or would you like to add to that? Or
No, I think you have it. I mean, there's different aspects to a religion and different ways that people engage with a religion. My dad was content with just the rules. You go to synagogue, he went every day. Shabbat on Saturday, we kept kosher. He never thought about it. He wasn't a theologian. He didn't have ideas about God. He never spoke about God. He never spoke about anything spiritual or religious. He just said, we're Jewish. We're Jews. This is what Jews do. This is what we're going to do. And if you asked him, how do you know this is what Jews do? He'd say, because my father told me, we're Jews. This is what Jews do. And, my Zeta, my grandfather, lived around the corner, and we could go over and talk to him. And said, this is what Jews do. And lots of times, and your father doesn't do it right, and they would have discussions about it. But it was just following rules. That was it. My dad never questioned it. He just did it. And he never was interested in going deeper into the stories in the Bible. And he just wasn't interested. It was just rules. I was interested in going deeper. And I took classes and I studied with people who were interested in interpreting the Bible psychologically and, anthropologically. But ultimately, there's the deepest level, which is the mystic level that points you beyond levels to a direct encounter with the divine. So telling your son, yeah, look, this is the language I know, and I'm going to share it with you. But I hope you learn other languages. And the only thing I would have added, and I'll tell you a story about my grandson. The only thing I would have added is, there are also times to be silent, no language. My son, who's in his 40s, came across his son, who's now 7. This was last year, I think, maybe when he was 5 or 6.
That's the age.
Yeah, he was 5 or 6. They were walking in the woods, and they were just wandering around. And my grandson climbed up on this flat rock. He sat on the rock, cross-legged, like a Buddha, with his hands in his lap and his head facing down, and his eyes closed, and he was meditating. And my son said to him, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "I'm just being here." And he said, "Who told you to do that?" He goes, "I don't know. I'm just doing it." So, I never taught him how to meditate. He just naturally was meditating on this rock. So there's a time when kids are just primed for this silence. I forget, Joseph Chilton Pierce once told me that it's tied to your teeth. When your teeth start coming in, your permanent teeth start coming in, and then when your wisdom teeth come in, there's certain times in your life when you're physically and mentally set to dive more spiritually into reality beyond religion through contemplative practice, through meditation. And he was just ready. Your son may be in the same place.
Same place. And we were talking about rules, and in these also rituals and rites are made out of rules. If you would say, why is it, and what is at the end the importance of rituals and rites, and in which place would you locate them in this map of the path to consciousness?
Great. I mean, you ask wonderful questions.
Thank you, Rabbi.
So it all depends on your mindset. So, for example, and it's easier for me to see other people's rituals because I'm not so used to them. But take, for example, communion in a Catholic church. So I don't know, why it was created. And I don't know what people are thinking when, I teach at a lot of churches on Sundays, and I'll sit while they take communion. And it seems for most people to be fairly rote. They do it every week, and they get up and they receive the body and the blood of Christ, and they take it, and that's that. But when you think of it outside just the ritual or outside just the habit of doing it, what is this ritual? It's taking into your body through your mouth the divine. Think of how intimate it is to let another being come in, have access to you through your mouth. I mean, kissing you. You can make it more sexual, but to have access to have oral contact with another being when you're breastfeeding, when you're right. I mean, there's just something incredibly intimate about oral contact. And here you have God. It's God, right? Don't get hung up on this is Jesus or this is the Christian God. Forget that for a second. It's God. It's the divine. And you're opening your mouth and taking in the body and blood of God. That is an incredibly intimate act. It's ritualized, but that's what makes it more powerful. It's not just, here's a cracker and some juice and go have a snack. That's not what it is. It's highly choreographed. It's ritualized to make it more, wow, okay, here it comes, the body and blood of God into your mouth.
Yeah, like perhaps wish you out of a dimension and put you...
Exactly. Now, today, at least in many American Catholic churches, they place the wafer in your hand and you take it in your mouth. But originally, I think the priest placed it on your tongue. So it's even more. You're not in control. They're doing it. So it's even more heightened. The point is, you're potentially in an altered state of consciousness to have this happen. In a synagogue, there's a point in the service where the Torah, which is a woman, right? And most people just think of, because they don't know the Hebrew, the word Torah is a feminine noun. People will talk about Torah as an it in English, but that's false. It's a she. And she is taken out of the ark, and she's paraded through the congregation. But I've been in synagogues, in fact, my own synagogue, where you would take the Torah out of the ark and pass her from person to person. And for some people, and you're supposed to hold her. And it's this intimate embrace of the divine feminine. It's the word of God as, like in the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So here's the Word of God in a Jewish context, and it's feminine. And you're taking the feminine and you're holding her. And in many synagogues, people just do it. It's rote. It's just, okay, got it, pass it, got it, pass it, got it, pass it. But I've been in places where some people are in such an altered state when the Torah is passed to them that they embrace her like a beloved. And I've seen people suddenly go into an ecstatic dance, twirling with her like a dance partner, because they're not in their normal mindset. They've lost that egoic consciousness. They're in that divine consciousness, the same consciousness that the astronaut had looking at the earth without the boundaries. They're in that consciousness, and they're embracing the divine mother, the divine feminine, and they're dancing with her in this ecstatic way. So ritual has this power, if it's set up right, and if you're ready for it. Ritual has this power to lift you out of your ordinary mind, the mind of separation, the mind of tribalism, and bring you into this divine mind, the mind of non-duality, the mind of radical oneness.
And Rabbi, what does the teaching of the mystics, whereas of organized religions or indigenous religion, have in common?
So the mystics teach four things, I think. Aldous Huxley, in his book Perennial Wisdom, goes through the mystic teachings of the world's religions and shows you the four things. My book, Perennial Wisdom for the Spiritually Independent, does the same thing, though in language that's simpler because I'm not as complicated as Huxley. But when you come down to it, I think the mystics teach four things, and you'll find it in indigenous traditions, and you find it even in mainstream traditions from the mystics' perspective. But it's just four things. The first thing is everything is a manifesting of this one reality. You can call it God, you can call it Brahman, you can call it Christ consciousness, you can call it Dharmakaya in Buddhism, you can call it nature, mother. I mean, there's Tao, there's no end of language that we have for this. But there's just this one non-dual dynamic happening that manifests as you and I and trees and plants, but also as, coffee mugs and everything else. That's number one. Number two, you and I have an innate capacity to realize that we are part of this thing. You know, what you were calling aliveness. It's one of the Hebrew words that I like. It's chiyut, aliveness. So it's the first point is everything is a manifesting of this aliveness. And you and I have the innate capacity to awaken in, with, and as this aliveness. And there's certain points in our life, like our kids, who are primed for that. They know that. The third point is when you're awake in, with, and as this aliveness, you feel this internal call for compassion, justice, to love one another, or what they call in the Bible to be a blessing to all the families of the earth, not just human. It's not like someone tells you from the outside. You recognize the oneness of everything, and you're called to engage with everything with justice, compassion. And then the fourth point is awakening to aliveness and being a blessing. That's the highest calling of a human being. That's why you're here. Not for salvation, not for enlightenment, not for immortality, but to awaken to your true nature and to be a blessing to all beings on the planet.
That's so beautiful. Explain. Thank you. So reading about mystics, I encounter Rabbi Salman Schachter Shalomi. I hope I spoke that.
My teacher. Yeah.
Wow. And from my outsider point of view, I saw him as a real visionary in the sense of how he created a fully inclusive community, making Jewish mysticism a joyful observance available to several generations, mostly of American Jews. And at the same time, and I don't know how to put it or call it, I think he was courageous enough to engage in a deep and transparent ecumenical relationship with leaders of the world's religions. Because I think he met with the Dalai Lama and Thomas Merton and Howard Thurman and so on. And what I most liked about seeing him in these videos was this joyful playfulness, personality, and sense of life. His immense curiosity, I don't know, exquisite intelligence, and his gracious and kind ways of making feel everybody at ease. And I'm talking about everybody because I saw videos with him. It was with young people and old people. And I think he even emphasized the old people's importance roles as wisdom keepers, if I'm correct. And yeah, I think for me, he would be someone whose life portrays a wonderful example of personal courage. And you mentioned that it was your teacher. So what was it to meet him?
Oh, wow. That is hard to answer. I mean, I agreed with everything you said. You know, there's a Hasidic story, and now I can't remember the Rebbe that the story is about. But the story is about a student who goes to see the Rebbe, and he's there for months. And when he comes back, they ask him, so what did you learn? You know, what was the teaching? What great mystical thing did you learn? And the student says, I learned how to tie and untie my shoes. In other words, I learned just the normal everyday way of being in the world. Everything Reb Zalman did was like magic. So it would take hours to try to unpack it. But I want to tell you two things, okay? Let's see if I can do this quickly. I was with him once at a synagogue, very Orthodox synagogue, and we got there early on a Sabbath, Shabbat morning, and the rabbi hadn't arrived yet. This is a synagogue that separated men and women. And he said to the group, which was men and women, he says, who wants to study? Who wants to learn? And he said, come on, we'll study before the rabbi comes. And everybody gathered around, men and women, and that's not how they did it there. And he pulled down a book and he started teaching everybody. And he had one person stand by the window as a lookout, because when the rabbi came, they had to stop. So he was just teaching everybody. He didn't care. Men, women, Jews, non-Jews, he didn't. He just loved everybody and wanted to share the wisdom that he had with whomever wanted to learn. And then while they were studying, about half an hour, so the guy at the window yelled out, the rabbi's coming, and they all scurried back, And then throughout the service, he had, his pockets were filled with candy. And the little kids would run over to him, and they called him Grandpa Zadie. And they said, Zadie, can we have some candy? And he would pull a book off the shelf, and he would say, here, read this, and then come back when you're done. And they would read it and rush back, and then he'd give them chocolate. And the service goes on for hours. These kids were so wired with candy that it was amazing. But about the ecumenical. So one day, when Reb Zalman went to this interfaith, interspiritual conference, it was during a period of the Jewish year where you pray. It's the end of the Jewish year before the New Year starts, and there's special prayers that go on in the morning. And he goes up to the
Yom Kippur?
The roof. This is before
Rosh
Hashanah, before Yom Kippur. It's the month of Elul, the last month of the year. It's a period of forgiveness. He went up on the roof of the hotel, and he's going to do his morning prayers, and they end with the blowing of the shofar, the ram's horn. So he goes up on the roof, and he's getting ready, and a Native American guy comes out to do his morning rituals on the roof. And they just sort of nod to each other, and they're at opposite sides of the roof, but they can see each other. And Reb Zalman pulls out his prayer shawl, which is a big prayer shawl, and the other guy pulls out a big prayer blanket, and they look at each other, and okay, they put on their blankets. And then Reb Zalman pulls out his tefillin, this leather boxes that you wear on your head and your arm. And the native guy has his similar kind of thing. And then Reb Zalman pulls out something else, and the other guy pulls out something else, but they're very similar. And they go through their whole ritual, and it's very parallel. And at the end, Reb Zalman pulls out the shofar, and the other guy pulls out a conch shell. And they both blow, the shofar and the conch shell to bring their services to a close, their prayer service to a close. And then when they're done, they both look at each other and they rush to the center of the roof and they go, "Let me see your stuff." And they start sharing all their ritual items because they realize that they're doing the same thing with the same things, but the items are just different enough because the cultures are different enough to make them interesting and enriching to one another's culture. And Zalman wasn't afraid of the differences. He thought it enriched everyone's culture to understand and participate in the differences. He was a brilliant, intellect and open-hearted human being.
Hi, we would love to hear your comments and learn about what you see. Share your input at www.cecipodcast.com and follow us on social media. Oh, I almost forgot. To accompany us in this season's journey, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And now let's continue with Ceci.
So you're talking about this great story, and then I would like to ask you, could you care talking to us about the Jewish meditation practices you learned from him and the Kabbalistic and Hasidic sources he introduced and to which he even adapted rituals from other traditions?
Yeah, now I don't know if I can answer the last one. I don't know if Zalman adapted traditions from other religions. Maybe he did. I don't know. Well, no, I take that back. He had his own version of metta practice. Yeah, I think he taught it in the context of the Jewish art of loving kindness, but it was really metta practice. So metta is loving kindness practice, where you send blessings out to people. May you be happy, may you be free, that kind of thing. But Zalman had his own version. And the way I learned it was you visualize people close to you that you love, people with whom you're struggling, and you say to them, and you can do it with people who are alive, people who are deceased. The way I learned it from him was, may you be free from fear, may you be free from compulsion, may you be blessed with love, may you be blessed with peace. And he had a little room in his, he lived in, eventually he settled in Boulder, Colorado. And in the basement of his house, there were many rooms. And one was a classroom, and one was a place where he had all his audio equipment. But he had a little meditation room. And in that room, he had, it was like a recipe box. I don't know if people even have recipe boxes. It was a tin box, and when you opened it up, it was like a file card box with 3x5 note cards. And they had, the cards were divided by tabs for the month, so January through December. And in each month, he had the names of people arranged by their birthday. So you'd go to April and you'd find my birthday, and there would be my card. And what he would do is he would go through, take out the April cards, and throughout the month of April, he would, I don't want to say pray exactly, but he would do his version of metta practice for people. So when my name would come up, he would visualize me and he would say, may Rami be free from fear. May Rami be free from compulsion. May Rami be blessed with love. May Rami be blessed with peace. It's a practice that I use myself all the time. And again, you do it with people living, people deceased. I do it on the anniversary of people's death. I do it on people's birthdays. I do it with people with whom I'm struggling. The idea behind it, for me, is to realize that, because you start with, may you be free from fear, may you be free from compulsion. Everyone's afraid. And that fear forces them, it's a kind of compulsivity to do things they wouldn't normally do if they weren't afraid. And it makes me feel compassion for people. And so I want them to be free from that fear, free from that compulsivity. I think he adapted that from the Buddhist metta tradition. But then you talked about teachings that he taught from, Judaism itself.
The Kabbalistic and Hasidic sources.
Yeah, from the Kabbalistic tradition. I mean, there was so much. That was his whole life. He's got volumes of books on how to do these, on his teachings. The one that I think, if I had to pick one that stayed with me, that still stays with me, it would be, I don't know how to put it exactly. I'll give you an example. It's looking, I guess in English, and in psychological terms, you'd call it reframing a situation. So, but you're looking to see the good in a situation. You're looking, I'll give you the example, and then maybe we can come up with a word for it. But we were in a restaurant once, Reb Zalman and I, and there was a mom with now I can't remember off the top of my head, it was 2 little kids or 3 little kids, and they were really acting out. They were loud, they were rambunctious, they were making her life miserable. Mostly because she felt they were annoying all the other customers. And so she felt embarrassed, that the kids were annoying the other diners, and they were mad at her because she couldn't control her children and all of that. And Reb Zalman was just observing, and he was trying to see it from the point of view of compassion. So the problem with this stuff is it's Kabbalistic and it gets complicated. But in the Kabbalistic tree of life, you have these opposites. And one of the opposites is a sort of a way of closing things down, and an opposite of that is a way of opening things up. And in some cases, things are so open, you have to use the energy of closing them down. But in this case, her situation was one of din. It was judgment, closing things down. And he had to bring the opposite energy of chesed, of compassion, kindness, grace, into her situation. Does that make sense? So she was in this tight, closed situation of self-judgment, self-criticism. My kids are making everyone miserable. I'm a bad mom. They're all looking at me. That was her, on the tree of life, that was the part of the tree that was really dominating. And her life was, in that instant, miserable. And he wanted to go in and change the energy by triggering the opposite side of the tree of openness, compassion, love. Okay. So he went over to her, and I thought, I'm projecting, but I thought she saw him coming, and I thought she must be thinking, oh my God, this is it. Someone's coming over. What is the matter with you? Can't you control your children? I'm trying to have lunch over here. What is your problem? Can't just get them out of here. So she's probably getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And he comes over and he smiles at her and he says, You are so blessed to have children so filled with energy, so filled with life. What a wonderful mother you must be to nurture them so that they can just be so alive. And you saw, because I'm watching, I didn't know what he was going to do. To nurture them so they are so alive. And you can see the tightness in her body just melt as he brought in the energy of compassion, the energy of openness. And that's a Kabbalistic practice, to shift the energies of the tree. Now, again, sometimes you have to go the other way, but in this case, completely tight, and he just had to open her up. And all he did was, first he was close to her. He made, he came into her sphere of presence. Then he just smiled. His face was radiant. He was soft. He was kind. His voice was soft and kind. And then he just used words that were the opposite of what she was feeling. But he did it in such a way that it penetrated her closed fearfulness and just opened her up. And the way I remember it was then the kids calmed down. But that could be my I could be making that part up. But she shifted. And maybe that shifted her kids. I don't know. But she shifted. And it changed her experience. And it was beautiful and brilliant and deeply Kabbalistic. I've managed to do that a couple of times in my life, but he could do that whenever he needed to.
I'm thinking about these wonderful exchanges, this transparent flow of experiences. I mean, from any picture of Rabbi Shachter Shalomi you can see the joy in his eyes. And in human relationships, said once Thomas Keating, a Catholic priest, a Christian monk and mystic, who played a major role in popularizing what is known as centering prayer. As mutual love deepens, there comes a time, he said, when two friends convey their exchanges without words. They can sit in silence, sharing an experience or simply enjoying each other's presence without saying anything. What meaning does friendship has for you, Rabbi? And what place should we reserve for it in our lives?
Okay, so I could answer that question, but I'm going to, and maybe this is an answer, but Father Thomas Keating, you quoted, right? So he was my friend also, and he was a friend of Reb Zalman. And I made this very short movie that you can find on YouTube, bringing these two old friends together. It's like 45 minutes long, maybe. And it's called The Kiss of God. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. The Kiss of God. And you can watch it for free on YouTube. And it's just these two old guys talking together. There's no drama. There's no plot. And at the end of the film, they were both getting tired. And they said, we can't, we really need to end this. And I said, okay, what I want you to do, and we filmed it in, because Reb Zalman was living in Boulder and Father Thomas was living in Snowmass, Colorado. And they met at one of Father Thomas's centers in the Denver area. And so I said, look, there's a little park right next to where we're meeting. Just want to have you guys walk the path in the park. It goes from the end of the park to a bench. Walk the path. You can talk if you feel like it. You can do whatever you want. Walk the bench. Walk to the bench. Sit on the bench. Bless one another. And that'll be the end of the movie. So, we got them to the top of the little walkway, and they're just walking down the winding path to the bench. They're mic'd. We can't hear them. The sound guy has, the earphones on, and he can hear them. And we can see the sound guy, and he's weeping. He's just crying. And we're saying to him, why are you crying? And through his tears, he's trying to tell us what they're saying, but it doesn't translate. And it's just these two friends sharing their love for one another. And the words are irrelevant. I mean, you can listen to the film, but the words are irrelevant. It's the love that the words sort of convey, but the love is deeper. It's the love between them that is so moving, even to those like the sound guy who didn't know either one of them. And then they get to the bench, they hold hands, they bless one another, and it is so powerful. Friendship has that power. Friendship is my guess is, and I don't really think it's a guess, but friendship is the antidote to the violence that's ripping the planet apart. This deep kind of mystical friendship. And, religion doesn't foster this friendship, but mystics do. And if Ceci, if you have time for one more story, can I
of course.
tell you something else?
We still have a couple of questions, but if you have time, I'm delighted to that you have time to share.
So let me introduce you to someone else, a friend of Reb Zalman's, a friend of Father Thomas's, a woman long deceased at this point, Sister Jose Habde. So Sister Jose Habde is a Native American medicine woman, and I think she's Franciscan nun. Also one of my teachers. I've been blessed with amazing teachers in my life. And she went to see His Holiness the Dalai Lama once. And one of the things you do when you meet the Dalai Lama is they give you a white scarf, and then you hand it to him, and he blesses it, and he hands it back to you. And she was told, do not touch His Holiness. You just don't make physical contact with him. And I don't know if that's because I've met him. No one told me that. Maybe it was because she was a woman. That's, I think, what the idea was. So they said, don't make physical contact with the Dalai Lama. So she gets in a line, and now she's right in front of the Dalai Lama. Dalai Lama is very tall. She is quite small. And she hands him I think it's called a kata, the white scarf. And then, the Dalai Lama has a beard. She grabs his cheeks with her hands. And they're both elderly people, but she's even more elderly, Sister Jose Habde. She grabs his cheeks, she shakes his face, and she says to him, I can do this to you. You're my baby brother. And he just starts to laugh. The lamas, the monks, they're like horrified, but she's laughing. He is laughing. They didn't know each other, but there was a friendship between them that was just spontaneous because neither one of them was bound by the rules of their traditions. It was just love that was their law.
Thank you, Rabbi Rami, for these great stories you shared. I want to ask you now about physical movement. And I would like to start with schaukel. Why do religious Jews sway or shuckle back and forth while praying and studying the Torah?
Yeah, well, religious Jews do that. A lot of liberal Jews don't, which is a shame. I grew up shuckling, you're rocking back and forth. We have bodies. And bodies, and I studied in the Zen tradition where if you move, you're in big trouble. But I think, bodies are meant to move. In Sufism, we dance. In Judaism, you shuckle. In lots of traditions, native dances, there's a lot of movement. And when you move, the potential, anyway, this is potentially true. When you move, you start to vibrate in tune with the universe. It says in the Bible, in the very beginning of the Bible, in Genesis, that the Spirit of God is the breath of God. The Hebrew is mirakethet, hovers, vibrates over the surface of the deep. So like the earth is covered in water, and the breath of God is vibrating over the whole thing. And then the vibration becomes the word, light, and then land, and all this stuff. the universe is the Word of God, and the Word of God is God's breath, and that's all vibration. So there's nothing solid in the universe. Everything is just dancing. Everything is vibration. So when you're moving, potentially, you're vibrating in tune with the vibration of the universe. When you dance, the universe is dancing with you, or the universe is dancing and you're dancing along with it. So movement is such a powerful thing to do. I don't know if you've ever done Sufi zikr, where you're
that's
moving,
that's where we were going now, exactly there. I want to ask you, there's a lot of circles in Sufi whirling, and that's a form of dancing worship in Sufism, no? And you were mentioning, I think, from the 12th or 13th century, and to followers of Muslim poet Rami. And Sufis twirl in a continuous motion with both arms outstretched to the sides, one hand pointed toward the ground and the other one pointed toward the sky. So whirling becomes this meditative-like state, right? So but you were already talking about this meaning of dancing in circles. And specifically, what can you tell us about these swirling movement of Sufi dance?
So what happens when now I'm not in any way an expert on dervish and Sufi, spinning. I've done, there's different kinds of movement in Sufism. One is the individual who spins. I can't do that. I've tried that. I get dizzy. But for people who can really do that, there is no dizzy. Even though your body is spinning, you're in a sense the unmoved mover at the center of the spinning. There's a stillness in the spinning, which I can only accept, on faith that someone is telling me that that's true. The other thing, though, when they do zikr and they do circle dancing, which is very common in indigenous cultures throughout the world, Native American, Jewish, Muslim cultures, they do a lot of circle work. There's something about going in a circle because it doesn't go anywhere. Linear dancing has a beginning and an end or something like that. But when you're going in a circle, you don't achieve anything external. It's just around and around, but it changes your consciousness. When you do it, if you're packed tightly together so that you're being held up by the people around you and you're moving around and around and there's foot movements and head movements so that it really is disorienting to your normal waking state consciousness, but you're being held up by the group in a sense. So you don't worry about falling because everyone's holding everyone else up. After just a few moments of this movement, you stop your orientation in place and time shifts or maybe disintegrates. I don't know what the word is exactly, but you're no longer yourself in that egoic sense of self. And you're just floating in community, and the community is floating in this greater, reality of the divine. It's I don't know if easy is the right word, but it's not a difficult practice to learn if you're doing it in a group that knows what it's doing, because the group carries you. It's very powerful. There's another practice that exists both in Jewish mystical and in Sufi practice. You can argue who taught whom. I was taught that the Kabbalists got it from the Sufis, where you're not moving, your feet are planted, but your body is moving forward and back. Am I right? Yeah. It goes, yeah, forward and back, and then side to side. but you're doing it in this rhythm way with a chant. So you're saying something and you're moving side to side, forward and back, and the chant has a certain breath work that goes with it. So you're doing this intense, like Kundalini kind of breathing and this movement, and you do that for 20 minutes if you can maintain the 20 minutes. When you're done, when I'm finished with that, Rami isn't there. It's just this, wow, something else. The same thing happens in kirtan practice in Hinduism, where you do call and response singing, and you find your body is just lifted by the call and response, and you find yourself spontaneously dancing. And I remember, I've done a lot of kirtan, but at one place I did it, the teacher said, when we're done, because it was going to be like a 3-hour thing, she said, when we're done, I was staying at the place, so I wasn't going anywhere, but she said, don't drive home if you were going to drive, because you won't be able to drive. And I was thinking to myself, I've done this before, I could drive. But when it was over, I couldn't even walk, let alone drive. So it really has this powerful transformative effect on your normal waking state consciousness. It wipes it out.
We were talking
so
about,
there's
right?
Something about movement.
This swiping you out to another dimension.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Movement does it. Singing does it. Chanting does it. Because it's all working with your body and your breath.
So, Rabbi Rami, we have talked about religions, language, words, movement, and all sorts of means that allow us to open into this greater reality. But there is one path, though. Father Keating had a favorite saying. He said, silence is God's first language. Everything else is a poor translation. Where does the beauty of silence comes from?
So silence happens when you've run out of everything else. I don't think you can impose silence because we're language beings, but you can run out of language. You can finally, your prayers end and you have nothing else to say. Your chanting ends because you've chanted it all and you're left with silence. And that's when something else happens. I agree with Father Thomas. He had this, I went to see him when he was dying. And he died at the monastery in Massachusetts where he was the abbot. But he was very, very sick in Snowmass, Colorado. We thought he was dying there. And I happened to be nearby, so I called and got permission to see him. And he met with me for about 45 minutes. And I just went to tell him how much I loved him. I thought, and it was the last time I saw him. But, I had no other agenda other than to say, you've been my teacher, my mentor, my friend for 30-something years, and I just wanted to say, I love you. But we're sitting there, and I thought, well, I'm going to ask him this question. And I said, you're dying. You know it. I know it. Everybody knows it. How are you dying? You've spent your life since you were 16 in the monastery. How are you using all of your tools to die? And I don't know if I can explain this, but he's sitting in his wheelchair, and he cups his hands in his lap, and he raises his hands up in front of his face, and he says to me, I'm dying the way I lived. And he says, this is how I live my life. Every time Thomas comes up, his ego, and he raises his hands in front of his face, he says, every time Thomas comes up, I let Thomas go into the silence. I recognize the noise of Thomas, and I let that go into the silence. And then Thomas comes back up, and I let Thomas go, and he drops his hands back into his lap. And he goes over and over again. He raises his hands, and he lets them go. And he says, when I die, Thomas is going to come up, Thomas is going to go, and Thomas won't come back up. And I said, I was totally moved by that. And I said, okay, but you're a Catholic priest. Where do you go? Where do you think you go? And he says, no, Rami, you don't understand. It was like, he didn't say this, but I thought he was thinking it. After decades of being with me, you still ask such a stupid question. But he said, look, Thomas comes up, Thomas will let go, and there is no place to go because it's all one, right? So he says there's just going to be this great release, this great silence, because the noise of Thomas is gone. And that's the gift, that's the grace of dying. But it's also the grace of being let go, of being surrendered. I don't think you can do it consciously. I think it's a gift that comes to you when you've expended whatever your practice is, your mantra, your whatever. There are moments in your practice when the practice stops and the silence arises and you're gone.
So this,
and then you come back.
this wholeness, when you say within, it is to be like more like a transversing force. Because as you said, we cannot call our divinity on command, but it's more like this surrendering, a sort of dwelling that we can be able to experience then this divinity force. And
Right. Because it's there, but I can't summon it on demand. I can't summon it at all. It's just there. I can get out of its way, but even that, maybe not. But I can exhaust myself, and when I do, it manifests.
So, Rabbi Rami, these last words of Jesus in the cross, well, there's like 8 sentences, but one of them is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Is that exactly that moment of feeling of separation and then coming back, that would then be the redemption? I don't know. How do you interpret that?
Yeah. I think that's one of the most brilliant lines uttered on the cross. In John, the Gospel according to John, Jesus says many things on the cross, like you said. But in the first Gospel, meaning the earliest Gospel, not the first Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but Mark is the oldest Gospel. That's the first one that was written, not the first one in the Gospel, in the Bible, in the New Testament. But the earliest Gospel is the Gospel of Mark. And in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus only says one thing on the cross, and that's Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that's how it ends. And so people thought, what a horrible, he ends with, in doubt. He loses his faith. What is that? We have to write some better things after that. We got to put some more words in his mouth. But what's not understood is the brilliance of what's happening to him and why he would say that. Because the key is Eli, Eli, my God. My God. Not God, but my God. Why have you forsaken me? What happens to us at the end is that our concept of God, all of our labels, I'm a Jew, I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Buddhist, I'm an atheist, I'm a secularist, I'm a humanist, I'm an American, I'm a German, I'm a Brit, I'm a, whatever it is. All of those, nationality, religion, gender, sex, race, all that stuff, all of that falls away, including our God idea. And whatever we were expecting to happen at the moment of our death, that falls away. So he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? The answer is because your God isn't real. And what doesn't forsake you at death is what's real. And what's real is the true divinity that is everything. And the death of Jesus is the dying into the eternal life of this divine reality of which everything is a part. So it's a beautiful statement. What has to happen, Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me. What he's saying really is you have to experience what I did. You have to have all of your ideas crucified. You have to be able to hang on the crucifixion of your life, your ideas, and be able to say, my God, why have you forsaken me? You have to have everything stripped away. In Christianity, it's called the apophatic path, the path of negativity, via negativa. Everything is taken away until there's nothing left except the truth. And the truth is the real God, the God beyond naming, the God beyond labels, the God that is the happening of all happening. And that is the ultimate rebirth. But not rebirth as a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu or Muslim. That's rebirth as the divine reality. It's a harsh if you don't get it, or it's a hopeful statement that everybody gets it. Yeah, it's the breakthrough.
So Wim Wenders's masterpiece, Wings of Desire, is a film narrated from the perspective of angels who can only see the world in black and white, can only be seen by children too. And it is only after an angel called Damiel that becomes human that the world reveals its colors. This happens after Damiel falls in love with the beautiful Marion, a lonely and depressed Trappist artist. And so in order to be able to come back to Earth, he gives up his immortality. And by the way, Marion is able to see Damiel's both forms, the angelic and the human. So both Marion and Damiel are portrayed as part of a shared experience. And his love is, of course, not a Hollywood love story, but rather it allows them to wonder the fact that they are alive, that they are able to feel at all and experience life. So every little thing becomes a miraculous possibility, from breathing to dancing to playing or loving each other. And for example, there's a moving scene where Damiel encounters a dying man who had just a traffic accident, and he soothes him by turning his thoughts to memories of life. And you see in this film, you see the images of bread, wine, this person riding a bicycle with no hands, and many more other worldly things. So throughout the film, there is a sense of wonder that at the world as a way of learning to be human through experience. I mean, Wim Wenders and his writers of this film, they're amazing. The film ends with a Damiel angel saying, which is now human, I know now what no angel knows. So these everyday life things, Rabbi Rami, seem to be the assurance of our divine nature. I have two questions. First, is mortality then the key to our divine nature? And second, do you believe our greater self to be mortal?
So let me take the second one first. Our true self is immortal, but it's not the soul. Right? I don't think there's a soul. I don't think, I like the ocean and wave analogy, that you and I are waves on an infinite and undying ocean. So the extent to which I identify with my wave form, I'm mortal. The extent to which I know I'm the ocean, I'm immortal. But my truest nature is the water, is the ocean. So I don't worry about dying. I mean, I'm not looking forward to the pain of dying, but I'm not worried about dying because it's only the dying of the form. It's not the dying of the essence. So I don't think that so I don't separate, my immortal self from my mortal self. It's all one thing, and it's fundamentally undying. So now I don't remember the first part. What was the first part of the question?
If this everyday life things like bread and life and being aware of every moment and the little things, that they seem to be the assurance of our divine nature. And is mortality then the key of our divine nature?
Okay. So I would say yes to the first half of that sentence and no to the second, because the little things are the divine. So bread and, eating and laughing and sex and breathing and dying. I mean, it's all part of the same happening. So it's all amazing. It's all wondrous. It's all to be celebrated. But it's all part of the infinite, immortal, divine happening. So I don't separate it out into, this is mortal and this is immortal. It's that there's this non-dual phenomenon happening that happens forever, but in bits that are only temporary, like waves that don't last forever. So I don't want to cling to any specific happening. But at the same time, I know any specific happening is a happening of this infinite, timeless happening. I don't know if that makes any sense. But I don't like the dichotomy. I don't want to split it, immortal and mortal.
Yeah.
It's all just the dance of God. It's all the happening of God.
And in this happening, our mortality really spices up, so to say, the things, right?
Right. I mean, it happens. I mean, you've got your son. I mean, that's a happening of God for however long the happening happens. But he isn't, that form of your son had a beginning. But his true nature has no beginning. And the form of your son every 7 years, I mean, when your son was born, when he turned 7, he's not that person anymore physically, because all, I think, but 3 cells in his body have died and been replaced. So, he's not even the same person physically, let alone psychologically. But spiritually, he's still the same being, because he's still the divine happening. So he'll go through many, many, many changes like that every 7 years, hopefully, till he's 120 or something. And but you keep loving him because of something, not, hey, wait, you're not the kid you were at 7. Now you're 14. I don't even know who you are. You don't say that. So it's something else that you love. So it's not the physical and it's not the psychological. I would say it's because on a deep level that here's this divine happening of which I'm a part. You're saying I'm a part of this happening. My son's a part of this happening. There's a love here that I could block maybe, but if I don't block it, I can only feel it. And that when it ends, hopefully you end before he does. When it ends, the form ends, and he'll grieve for that loss, but he'll still be with me, or I'll still be with him, because there's no other place to go. It's just God.
I'm taking the teachings you give to the children. I'm taking that with me at home.
It's just the rope. It's just the rope
home.
Right.
And so, Rabbi,
take the rope home.
we're getting near to the end of our interview, and I would like to I wouldn't like to finish yet without asking you to talk about the feminine divinity. You have written several books about her. I want to ask you, how does she speak? And could you be so kind in sharing with us your experiences with her and the result of having these encounters?
Yeah. So, yeah, I usually, okay. I mean, I'll do that because you asked me. I don't usually bring it up on my own. But so I believe, like we just said, that everything is the divine. I also I also think that people can have their own unique experiences of this infinite divine happening. So some people experience it as Jesus, and some people experience this divinity as Krishna. For whatever reason, my personal experience, and some people don't need a personal experience, but my personal experience is with the divine as mother. This is not something I chose. It's not something I sought out. It started happening to me. I was drawn to the idea intellectually first in the 70s when I first started learning about the feminine in Judaism, that Torah was a feminine energy. Mishnah, the early rabbinic teaching, is considered also feminine. Shekhinah, the presence of God, is feminine in Judaism. The Kabbalah is steeped in this feminine energy. The Shabbat is feminine. I mean, all this feminine stuff, it intrigued me, it attracted me intellectually, but I just wasn't interested in experiencing God in any form. It made no sense to me. And then I just started seeing the divine feminine form of God. First, I saw her in the most common form in my culture, not Jewish culture, my American culture, which was the form of Mary, the mother of Jesus. I mean, that's who it looked like to me. And then, this was annoying because it's like, I'm a Jew. That's not part of my Jewish culture. I'm a rabbi. That's not part of my, training is to see Mother Mary. And I talked to Sister Jose Habde about it, and she said, well, that's just a form. It's the Divine Mother calling to you or appearing to you, and you can't do anything about it. It's not your choice. It's just happening, so you have to accept it. And I wasn't happy with that answer. And then I went to another friend of mine, Andrew Harvey, and I said, look, this is not my theology. I don't think God has form. And he said, look, do you think God is everything? And I said, yeah. He says, well, then God is also form. And, you don't criticize someone who experiences God as Krishna. Why are you criticizing yourself for experiencing God? And by the time I spoke to Andrew, as Mary or as Kali or as Shekhinah or as, all these different forms. So I was surrendered to it. I just gave into it. And then I started having these auditory encounters where I would see her and then I'd hear her voice. And I found out later that this was not uncommon in Judaism, that the rabbis in ancient times, when they heard the voice of God, they heard a woman's voice. They called it a bat kol, the daughter's voice. So it was part of my tradition, though I wasn't aware of it until later. And the bottom line with my experience with the mother was what I called the searing love of the Divine Mother. Searing in that she wasn't like my mother. My mother was always, you're really good and you're great and you've written 36 books and won all these awards. I'm so proud of you. My experience of the Divine Mother was, I'm going to burn away every stupid idea that you've got. I'm gonna, give you that experience on the cross of my God, why have you forsaken me? I'm going to remove all of the falsehood that you believe in. I'm going to strip away everything that isn't true until you're left only with the bald truth that it's all God and nothing but God. And I'm not saying I'm there yet, but that's my experience of her, that her love for me is a searing love that constantly strips away all of my attachments to whatever idea I'm holding on to. It's been a tremendous blessing, but not one I sought. And yeah, I have written about her in the abstract, and I've shared some of these ideas in books, but mostly it's my personal. I have mantra that I do to her every day, and but it's mostly my private spiritual stuff.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing this. To finish our interview, Rabbi Rami, Wayne Tide, a Catholic monk who combined the traditions of Christianity, Hinduism, and Buddhism, used to say that we may or may not realize it, and that we may not even like it. But whether we know it or not, whether we accept it or not, mystical experience is always there, inviting us on a journey of ultimate discovery. We have been given the gift of life in this perplexing world to become who we ultimately are, creatures of boundless love, caring compassion and wisdom. Existence, he says, is a summons to the eternal journey of the sage by the way we all are. So my last question, Rabbi Rami, do you agree that we all have the potential to become mystics?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, all the people you've mentioned are friends of mine. So I really thank you for reminding me of all these wonderful people that I've known. Wayne died, he died from this cancer, and it was horrible to watch from the outside. Inside, he seems to have maintained this beautiful compassion and equanimity. But absolutely, there's nothing we lack. We just keep blocking it. We're natural mystics. You look at your little kids, and they're natural mystics. They don't know that they're supposed to dislike somebody because they belong to a different religion or race or gender or something. They just don't know. Somebody has to teach them this stuff. It makes no sense to them. They have the astronaut's mentality without having to go into outer space. They just know that it's all one. And they don't have the language for it, but they don't need the language for it. We need the language because someone has taken our innocence and corrupted it with bad language. And then we need better language to get us back to that state. But absolutely, we have everything we need if we were brave enough to actualize it. I mean, it's like when Jesus says you have to be as little children, and the apostles say, well, we have to go back into our mother's womb. Well, not literally, but spiritually. Yeah, go back into the womb of the Divine Mother and see the world as it truly is, the way little babies see it, the way the astronauts see it, the way the mystics see it, as one expression of the divine whole.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Rami, for your precious time, for sharing your experience and your wisdom with us. This was a superb and insightful interview. Thank you very much.
Ceci, it was my pleasure.
Thank you to our listeners wherever you are for having allowed us to share time with you. Please check this episode description should you wish to consult Rabbi Rami's books and learn more about the projects he is involved in. Remember that you can also join him on his podcast Spirituality and Health Magazine. We will see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.